Good morning, Miss Vanna.
Good morning, everybody. Welcome. Good morning, good morning. Thank you for deciding to join our webinar called Voices of Trauma. My name is Vanna Singh. I will be co-facilitating with Linsay Hill. Later, I will share more about me. Thank you.
My name is Linsay Hill. I am the Community Program Supervisor at the Multi-Service Center. Before that, I was a Positive Outcome Program Coordinator. I worked with young women of color who are involved or at risk of being involved in the justice system. I am the Vice President of the Freedom Project in Seattle. I am the Executive Director of My Sister's Keeper, working with young women who are experiencing generational trauma. And also we were going inside of youth detention centers working with young women. We wanted to thank you for joining us today for our webinar, Voices of Trauma. We don't speak for all, but we speak for few, which is our voices. We speak on our own experiences and not everyone's. Next slide. Cultural acknowledgement. If you know the land that you are on today, please put it in the chat. Even as we meet in virtual spaces, we would like to respectfully acknowledge the land we live is the traditional and unceded land of Sahelish people, land which touches and shares waters of all tribes and bands within the Duwamish, Chuwamish, Tulalip, and Muckleshoot nations. Unpaid labor acknowledgement. The first 12 generations of Africans in America were vital to the birth, growth, and survival of the United States. We mean the collective effort of 10 million people. They worked as unpaid laborers for 250 years to form the foundation of our country. So I acknowledge my ancestors today, the ones that I don't know, the ones that I don't know their names, and the tribes that I am not sure where I am from. Acknowledgement of refugee and immigrants in America. More than 40 million people living in the United States were born in other countries, and almost an equal number have at least one foreign-born parent. Together, the first generation foreign-born and second generation, children of the foreign-born. Vanna, what tribe are you representing today?
Ba Pailin and Bill Pramdam from Cambodia.
Next slide.
Community agreements. We ask that you listen with an open mind and an open heart. Don't judge the trauma, but listen for truth. Be comfortable with being uncomfortable. Also think about how you can be a part of the solution. And so also be open to sharing in the chat box what you're feeling. Silence doesn't always need to be filled. If there's a pause, embrace the silence. And questions will be answered towards the end. Next slide.
Before we
go ahead.
We're going to do a grounding moment. So if we could take a moment, and I'm going to have Vanna just bring us into this space.
Thank you. The purpose of the grounding moment is because there's many people watching right now, and we don't know where everyone's at. spiritually, and emotionally. But we would like for you to marry in the moment right now. And Linsay will help us by doing that.
I'm going to ask you to close your eyes and be present with us for a moment. I'm going to ask you to, if you feel any tension within your body, to start recognizing where those places are in your space. And I'm going to ask you just to take some deep breaths with me. Take a deep breath in. Deep breathe out. With every breath that you take, I want you to release the stress in your body. Take a deep breath in. Take a deep breath out. Before we take this last breath, I want you to just imagine all of your stress, all of your fears, all of your anxiety leaving your body with this last breath. Take a deep breath in. Take a deep breath out. We want to take a moment and give you about 3 minutes to do our first writing prompt. Talk about the person who has shaped you into the person, shaped you in personal and or professional. And if you could share anything with them, what would you say? Talk about the person, write about the person who has shaped you in personal and or professional. And if you could share anything with them, what would you say? Take about 3 minutes to write and think about that. About 20 more seconds. If you would like to share about any of your experiences, please put them in the chat. Next slide, please. This is for the voice of silence. Next slide, please. We want to thank the voice of silence that couldn't be in this space today. We wanted to honor the woman who said that she didn't have the capacity to be here and needed to take care of herself. In spaces that we work in nonprofit, for-profit, and everything in between, we talk about self-care, but we don't always honor the person who needs to care for themselves. So we wanted to thank the woman who chose to keep healing herself. We were actually supposed to be a 3-woman presentation. And so this is the honor, the other part of the person who was supposed to be part of the presentation that just couldn't do it today. Next slide. So let's talk about generational trauma. Before your mother was born, your mother, your grandmother, and the earliest traces of you were all in the same body. I want you to think about that for a minute. Before your mother was born, your mother, grandmother, and the earliest traces of you were all in the same body. So if you can imagine, if your grandmother was in an abusive relationship and your mother was in her womb and the earliest traces of you were already in your mother, you are feeling the effects that your mother is feeling, that your grandmother is feeling. So let's take this back. When my ancestors were put on boats and were stolen from their lands, and there were chains around their necks, around their stomachs, around their wrists, and on their feet, or they experienced trauma. They watched people be murdered, thrown off boats, raped. So change in all of the DNA and within our bodies started to change. When we were on plantations, it changed. So it kind of makes you experience things differently when you look at this, because you're experiencing things that you might not even know, and you're living things that you might not even know. Next slide, please. So here's a question. What do you think the difference between these 2 women are? If you know, this is Serena Williams, professional tennis player, and this woman next to her, we don't know her name. Well, I know her name, but her name is not known. Serena Williams has millions of dollars, and the woman next to her is just an everyday, goes to work, has her family, and is living her life. And she's not in the media. According to the Centers of Disease Control and Prevention, Black women in the United States are over 3 times more likely to die from pregnancy and childbirth-related causes. So why is that important? Well, when Serena Williams was carrying her daughter, and she went to the hospital and she said, I'm not feeling right. I'm not feeling great. I think there's some complications. She wasn't listened to. But she kept saying, I'm not feeling great. And she still wasn't listened to. So with millions of dollars, she's still not being listened to. The woman underneath, Her name is Yolanda. She was 35. She died in July 27th, 2020, 3 days after a cesarean section of her twins. She left behind 7 children, including her newborn twins. She told the doctors that she wasn't feeling right. She kept telling them over and over, there's something wrong. It doesn't matter if you have millions of dollars or if you are just a woman going in because she doesn't feel right after her C-section. They both had complications. And for generationally, we are ignored about our symptoms and we're told you're okay. Next slide, please. We're going to watch this video and it's going to tell you a little bit about generational trauma.
Lots of things get passed down through generations. Stories, heirlooms, genetic traits. A new field of study is suggesting that even trauma may be passed down through the generations. Let's dive in. First, what is generational trauma? Well, it's exactly what it sounds like. Trauma that isn't just experienced by one person, but extends from one generation to the next. Here's child adolescent psychiatrist Gayani De Silva to help explain.
If you have somebody in your family history who has suffered some sort of trauma, let's say racism or slavery or being the survivor of the Holocaust, that experience in your ancestors does get transmitted from one generation down to the next generation, to the next, and to the next, and to the next.
The concept was first recognized in 1966 by Canadian psychiatrist Vivian M. Rakoff. Rakoff and colleagues recorded high rates of psychological distress in the children of Holocaust survivors. A 1988 study found similar results with the grandchildren of Holocaust survivors. Since then, their descendants have been the most widely studied group, but in theory, any type of extreme, prolonged stress could have adverse psychological effects on children and/or grandchildren. How do health experts spot the signs of generational trauma? There are actually quite a few ways it could show up.
For when you're sitting with a patient, you would look for their specific signs of trauma. So you would look for mood issues or anxiety issues. Those are the primary big symptoms that people typically present with. And then you want to do kind of an investigation of why they feel depressed or they feel anxious or they're having some mood issues. And then you start to ask, why do you think you might be so depressed? Why do you think you might be so anxious? When did that start? Has it always been there? And so when people say, yeah, I feel like I've always been anxious, I've always been kind of depressed, and my mood has always been sort of irritable ever since I was a little child, then the lights got to go off in your brain. You got to think, oh, I wonder what happened before they were even born. I wonder what happened with their parents. Did any of your parents feel depressed or anxious? And then we'd ask about that. And then we'd say, oh, how come they felt depressed or anxious? Were they ever victims of trauma?
Even with all those symptoms for health experts to consider, there's no specific diagnosis for generational trauma, according to the DSM-5, which is the standard classification of mental disorders used by mental health professionals. But the phenomena of intergenerational trauma is well accepted.
It's a learned thing that your brain actually learns, and then the DNA actually learns it and then turns on certain DNA sequences versus other sequences, and it affects brain development. It affects how you learn how to regulate your mood. It affects how your limbic system, which is the part of your brain that is involved with managing emotions, how that develops. And it also has implications on how you react to stress.
Unfortunately, there are no easy answers, but generational trauma can be resolved if a holistic, intense intervention is put in place. This often involves individual therapy, though group and family therapy is another option.
Depending on how severe their symptoms are, so if they're anxious all the time, they're having panic attacks and they can't seem to function as they would like to function in their daily life, we might try medication. So something like a selective serotonin reuptake inhibitor. These medicines are like Prozac, Lexapro, Celexa, Zoloft. Those are kind of the common ones. And we would also highly recommend and want our patients to be in psychotherapy, because psychotherapy is going to help you understand where that anxiety is coming from, where that trauma is coming from, and help you put it in a way in your brain so that you can deal with it, you can handle it, and so it doesn't manifest in symptoms.
If you think you may be experiencing generational trauma, seek help from a behavioral health provider.
Thank you.
4 out of 5 women with sensitive skin would recommend
Beautifully put. Next slide, please. And we're going to hear from a young woman about her experience with generational trauma.
So sweet, the journey, when you come to love yourself, accept yourself, forgive yourself, respect yourself, believe in yourself, be yourself. Diane Reeves, in her song, Testify. At the age of 13, I found myself not wanting to be who I was. There was no joy in my life. Living became a rut and routine. In a recent Florida Times Union article, it reported that according to research conducted by the Dolores Barr Weaver Policy Center, status of girls in Florida, we are in crisis. 1 in 3 girls believe that life is not worth living. I was one of those girls. But then I received a small gift that sparked a revelation for me. I needed to see who I wanted to be and who I was. I wasn't going to be defined by my past experiences or the effects of intergenerational trauma. This mental shift gave me the permission and strength to deal with all of who I was. I needed to see the me that was curious about the why and how of the world. The me that had been questioning their sexuality since the 2nd grade. The me that had been festering in anger and confusion for as long as I could remember. It gave me permission to deal with the girl in the mirror who was afraid of what it would mean to find herself as a lesbian Black woman. This is my journey. I had to first unpack my parents' words. You don't know what it is like to have problems. Stop crying, or I'll give you something to cry about. Why are you so sensitive? Their words affected how I handled my emotions. They unknowingly trained me how to deny my feelings. But this learned denial only brought me closer to my truth. I wanted to be my best true self, my honest self. What this meant was for me to be on a journey to discover my values, become more precise about what was needed, and be determined to find my peace. I know that you, out there today, want to find your own peace, and you can do so by taking charge of your mental health. So what does it mean to care for your mental wellness? Begin with acknowledging and being honest with yourself. To heal from my trauma, I had to pinpoint what it was that was causing me pain. I had to change the negative ways I spoke to me about me. I'm not lazy. I'm tired. I'm not a disappointment. I'm finding my own narrative. Practicing acknowledging and being honest with myself looked like understanding that my parents, peers, and people in my community had projections that did not belong to me, nor did it define me. This revelation was emotionally groundbreaking. Like some of you in the audience, I'm a survivor of my parents' divorce. I did not know how much losing my family was going to affect me. I felt angry and betrayed. I didn't trust anyone. My inability to trust affected how I was able to commit to relationships, whether platonic or romantic. I wasn't able to be vulnerable enough to establish a relational foundation. I had to do more personal work. I had to learn and practice how to feel. So you practice how to feel? Close your eyes. Breathe. Ground yourself. Is your head hurting? Stomach turning? Heart beating just a little bit faster? When I allowed myself to feel and digest that anger, I realized I had projected onto my parents what I believed a marriage should be. I needed to see they were human and hurt people too. My parents were affected by their own intergenerational trauma. Intergenerational trauma can be defined as trauma that is transferred in between generations. After the first generations of survivors experience trauma, they can pass that trauma on to their children and future generations. Examples of this phenomenon have been seen within the African American community and the everlasting effects of slavery and oppression, in the Native American community, and the lasting effects of suppression of culture and oppression, and in the Jewish community, with the lasting effects of the Holocaust. Recognizing intergenerational trauma is real and relevant, and it gave me a different context for looking at people. It allowed me to be more self-aware and make healthier choices regarding my mental health. I started to become at peace with who I was and my emotions. Teen depression, anxiety, and suicidal deaths are rising among children like you and me. We need to know how to heal. We must create a healthier dialogue for the person that we want to be. We must stop the cycle of intergenerational trauma. We must take care of ourselves so that we can be our best selves. So my good people, I invite you to cry when you feel like crying. Laugh if it helps subside the anger. Take that mental health day if the day just isn't your day. And let your journey be sweet, accepting, and forgiving while you find who you are and gain your peace. You matter. Thank you.
Next slide, please.
Pain travels through family lines until someone is ready to heal it in themselves. By going through the agony of healing, you no longer pass the poison chalice onto the generations that follow. It is incredibly important and sacred work. So here's my example. My mother and aunt were raised in the villages of Southeast Asia. When you're living in impoverished conditions, living with no electricity, drinking dirty river water, no access to education or health care, you're at risk for addiction to alcohol and other substances. You're likely to be a victim of toxic masculinity, and you're more likely to suffer from domestic violence. Here in America, I found myself in this situation. So at the age of 27, I broke that chain. I decided to start my healing journey. I found someone who fit my standards, and I learned to grow with him. By setting the example, I taught my daughters what a healthy relationship looks like. It may not be perfect, But the perfect part is when you're trying and you learn to admit your mistakes and learn how to forgive. So tomorrow you can learn how to make healthier choices. With everyday practicing, it gets better and better. I was proud of myself because I was always looking for ways to improve my situation, physically, spiritually, and emotionally. I believed that if there's a will, there's a way. Next slide.
Sorry, I really want to break down trauma. So 5 layers of trauma, personal and collective. So let's go for the shame level. That's your bricks. Above that is your conscious mind. Below that is your personal unconsciousness, your current life trauma, and your generational trauma, your collective unconsciousness, community trauma, racial trauma, and ancestral trauma. So as we break down these layers, right? Your shame layer is what protects you. The bricks are what protect you. And if we start breaking things down, your personal unconsciousness, your current life trauma, and your generational trauma, they almost coincide. Because the stuff that you're experiencing with your generational trauma, it will flow over into your current life trauma and you won't even know it, along with your ancestral trauma, the racial trauma, and the community trauma. Like all of these things come back into your current life trauma. But when we start really feeling this piece, I want you to really think about and ask yourself these questions. When you look within yourself, how do you see your trauma? And here's another question for you that I need you to think about. Is your trauma affecting how you show up to work and in community? I asked that question because I realized I had to ask myself that question. I work with youth. So is my trauma showing up in the way that I show up for my community and the way that I show up for my youth? Is it affecting the way that I give advice or support or I mentor? So as we keep going through this workshop, just ask yourself these questions. Is my trauma affecting how I show up for myself, my community, and my work? Next slide, please. The voice of oppression. Next slide, please. So here's a deep reflection question. And I want you to take some time to think about this. Write a story where you were forced to face your own bias, prejudice, or privilege. How did it make you feel and what did you learn about yourself? Write a story where you were forced to face your own bias, prejudice, or privilege. How did it make you feel and what did you learn about yourself? If you are willing to share in the chat, please go ahead. There's no pressure. And we're going to give you about 5 minutes to process this question. We have about 1 minute left. I want to honor those who have shared their story in the chat. I've been reading as you've been putting them in, and I appreciate you being vulnerable and sharing this in this space. So I just wanted to acknowledge and honor you in this moment. Next slide, please. If you would like to keep writing in the chat, please do as we continue our presentation.
Where is Southeast Asia, and what are the ethnicities that are included? There are 11 countries in Southeast Asia: Brunei, Burma, Malaysia, Vietnam, Singapore, Indonesia, Philippines, East Timor, Thailand, Cambodia, and Laos. Next slide. Again, my name is Vanna Singh, and we are going to talk about my migration story and my healing journey. Next slide. We're not going to watch this video.
These friends get together occasionally to guzzle beer and eat pizza. It's a taste of their old American home, now lost to them. They moved to the United States as refugees, some while just babies, and spent most of their lives there. But after falling into gangs and crime, they were deported back to Cambodia, a country many of them barely knew. Their tattoos set them apart from the crowd.
Really, our mind is Americanized. You know what I'm saying? To come here is a whole different atmosphere, whole different attitude. You know what I mean? It's hard to adjust.
After the Vietnam War, tens of thousands of refugees from Southeast Asia were granted asylum and permanent residency in the United States, but not citizenship. Under an agreement between the U.S. and the Cambodian governments signed in 2002, non-citizens who commit so-called aggravated felonies, covering a range of minor and serious offenses, can be deported. When that moment came for Saran, he had already been out of prison for several years, living with his partner and child in California.
When they hold me, they took me on the bus and took me to the holding tank and sent me off to Cambodia. No, they didn't tell my family or nothing. Nothing.
Support is minimal for the deportees, sometimes known as Americans because of their dual cultures. Jobs are scarce, and many rely on their families back in the U.S. to send money. All carry painful memories of the lives they left behind.
What I'm trying to do is forget, because I know this is permanent. You know, I'm a permanent resident here now, and I know that if I keep on holding on to the past, I won't live the life that I'm living now into the future.
More than 500 people have been sent back since the agreement was signed. Cambodian authorities have said they want to revise the deal, but for now, The Khmer deportees are resigned to living their lives and feeling like foreigners in their land.
Next slide. The purpose of that video was to share a little bit about Southeast Asians' struggles. That is one of the ways the systemic oppression shows up in our community. For anyone who has broke the law, been sentenced to 366 days or more to prison time, you are likely to have received a final deportation order if your crime fits in the deportable category. A lot of Southeast Asian families struggle with the criminal justice system. We are not given the opportunities to heal from the genocide that our parents suffered from. So we were not given the right or any mental health therapies so we can break that generational trauma. Survival skills for Southeast Asia differ because we have to walk around with our guards up high because we were also impacted by racism, not only from the systems, but from the communities. And we had to find ways to learn how to defend ourselves and our people. And it usually would cost us our freedom. Next slide.
Again, my name is Linsay. I came from a family of secrets and love at the same time. I was born in Spokane, Washington, moved to California at an early age, and moved to the University Place area when I was in the first grade. When I first moved here, I was in the, they tried to move me back to kindergarten. And what they didn't realize is that I had a learning disability. So within the first grade, they had multiple times told my mom how I wasn't smart, how I wasn't going to excel at anything, and that I needed to restart from the very beginning, which would be kindergarten. My mom got me tested and decided that, no, we're not going to give her a label of stupid, but we're going to work through this and find out what is wrong. So I stayed in the school. I was maybe one of 5 Black families within this school. And within the second or third grade, still didn't make any friends. Well, the third, I see these 3 amazing young girls, and I just said, I want to be their friend. So with that, I decided that I would ask them every day to be their friend until they would say yes. One day, I said, can I be your friend? And they said, no, you can't be my friend. And I asked them why. And they said, because you're Black. And I said, well, what does that have to do with anything? And they said, we don't play with niggers. I'm in the second or third grade. I didn't know, first of all, what the words they were saying meant. But the next thing they said was, if you want to be our friend so bad, you have to sign a slavery contract. So I signed a slavery contract. I'm like, oh, this is going to be fun. I'm going to carry all their books. I'm going to make all of their food. I'm going to make sure that they have everything that they need, and they're going to love me and they're going to like me. So I signed a slavery contract. I signed it every week on the same day for about 2 months until the contract, the previous week's contract, they decided to throw it away in the garbage and my teacher found it. After the teacher found the slavery contract, she called my mother, and my mom decided to take away all of my white Barbies and say, we're going to start teaching you about your history. And I was like, well, no, my white Barbies have families and you're not going to take them away. And this is, I wanted to be white because that's what was beautiful to me at that moment. And my parents were really concerned that I could not see myself for who I was as a person. So my mom decided to start going into the school. She decided to start working through those moments with me. And she started teaching my class and those girls who asked me to sign the slavery contract, what slavery really looks like. As I continued to go through school and really focus on what being Black meant within a white school district, I was told from the time I came to University Place first grade until I was a senior in high school that I would never amount to anything and I'm not smart enough to go to college. But I also, in that time frame where you would have family back you up and still give you those nourishing moments, I didn't have that. My parents got divorced when I was in the 5th grade. My mom kind of dropped out of my life when I was 13 or 14. And my dad was the one who raised me. So as I'm being raised by a father who wasn't even really existent into our home because he was working so much. We had no food most of the time. We had a house though. We had no furniture. And me and my brothers joke about how we used to steal food just so we could eat. Or my sister, giving us her last $10 so we can go get some 7-Eleven nachos, and that would be our meal for the day. So as I'm experiencing all these things, I didn't realize that the trauma that I had been experiencing in my childhood was going to be reflected in my adulthood. So as I continually got older and I graduated high school, I didn't go to college. I decided to go to a community college because I just felt like I might be smart enough to be there. But I started drinking heavily and I started looking for relationships in men. And I started looking for relationships within friends because my friends started to become my family, the family that I didn't have, nor was I raised with. And so I really wanted to, fit in somewhere, someone to love me. So the more I started drinking and partying and spending time with different people, the deeper that I got. I was drunk more than I was sober. I was popping pills on occasions. And I was hanging out with drug dealers, gang members. I thought it was cool because that's what my friends were doing. And the older I got, I just kept getting deeper and deeper. One day, I was hanging out with a friend and we had just met her boyfriend, her dealer at a bar. And, I decided I was going to be the designated driver. And she was like, yeah, just have one drink. And I was like, I'm the designated driver. And I know one drink turns into 2 drinks, 2 drinks turns into 3 drinks, 3 drinks turns into 4 drinks. And that's exactly what happened when she said, don't worry about it, we got this. So 1 drink turned into 2 drinks, 2 drinks turned into 3 drinks, 3 drinks turned into 4 drinks. And we ran out of the bar and I still had a drink in my hand. It wasn't legal, but why not? We were going to go to a club and we were going to dance it off and drink some more. And I was just going to live my best life. I knew that we had drove drunk and blacked out more times together than we have anywhere else. So as she decided, I got this, I didn't drink as much as you did, so let's drive. So we were driving. And so she's swerving. I was like, sis, you swerving. She's like, I got this. And we were going past State Patrol, their building in the Parkland area. And while we were driving, a police officer became behind us and she's still swerving. And so they pull us over about a block away from our location. And she's flooring and she can't do it. And the police officer says, "Can you drive?" I said, "Well, if I drive, then you're going to have to arrest me too." And he said, "Well, if you can't get into, find someone to pick you up, I'm taking you with her." So he puts her in the car. He actually was kind enough to charge my phone, and I was able to call her mom to pick me up. She ended up going to drug court, and she couldn't stay sober through the whole time. I know because I didn't stay sober with her. And then I realized that I wasn't helping her and I wasn't helping myself. So I decided to take some time away and let her do what she needs to do. And I got sober-ish, not completely, and she ended up doing something that was harmful to her children and her family. And she ended up getting a year and a day. And during that year and a day, I remember getting a letter from her saying, you know, I don't blame you, because I was the one who was supposed to be behind the wheel. It was me who was supposed to get the DUI, the one who was supposed to go to drug court. And that's part of the guilt that I have with myself. So I started working I got out of nursing because I was a certified nursing assistant, and I went into nonprofit. I started working with youth, and my experience is that I just wanted to help people. But then I started working for the multi-service center. I lost a coworker from trauma, and he died from his asthma. I had a youth hang himself, and I was living in an abusive marriage, and my ex-husband decided that he was going to try and embezzle $10,000 out of his work, telling them that that I had lost 2 children and I just gave birth and I didn't. We just came back from a vacation, and he almost got $10,000, and I was attached to it. I didn't know about it, but my name was attached to the GoFundMe. So during these moments, I just broke down and I went to therapy, and I needed to find some peace somewhere. So I started doing some internal searching and really working through those moments. But during those moments, I realized that all of the struggles that I've been having, if it's with my weight, with alcohol, with me trying to fit in somewhere, it's with my generational trauma. The things that I have been experiencing through my whole life are things that have been passed down to me generational to generational to generations. And I'm now working with my own family so we can start talking about the things that we couldn't talk about. Because it's that important. It's important to know where I came from. It's important to know that we are important. And it's important to know that even though I don't know my history, and I don't know anything besides my grandparents, I don't even know my great-grandparents, that I am worthy enough to start healing myself, so when I do have children, they don't have to go through the same struggles that I'm going through. So before I end my healing story, I am also a poet. And I wanted to read you a poem that I wrote prior to, while I was dealing with a lot of the murders last year, and also dealing with my own Blackness in these moments. It is called Too Black. Too black to be American, not Black enough to be African. I was once kissed by mother, son. She radiated the melanin within my skin as I walked through the village. They bowed to my beauty, the crown of braids that was weaved by the gods, as I held my baby at my breast and my king by my side. Too black to be American, not Black enough to be African. I spit with rage and fear. My brother sold us for guns and the white shadow's wealth. My baby was thrown overboard because I refused to eat. My king dead beside me, choked on his own vomit. My sister raped in front of me on a hard wooden floor. Chains wrapped around my throat. Mother sun, father moon, take the breath from my body. Too Black to be American, not Black enough to be African. My new name is nigger bitch. I am no longer a queen, but a woman chained worse than cattle. I pick cotton by the sun is no longer my mother. Her heat destroys me as I sing out to my moon father. Rise quickly so I could hide in your safety. Too Black to be American, not Black enough to be African. Don't use that water fountain. Don't use that bathroom. Don't look at that woman and sit wherever we say. You ain't welcome on our side of town. Swing left, swing right. Lynching is such a kind word. Too Black to be American, not Black enough to be African. We free. Same school as you. We slipped this rock. I was slipped this rock and told to smoke it. Yo, daddy, $5 will make you feel real good. I gotta have just one more rock. Too Black to be American, not Black enough to be African. I can't play with you because you're Black. Your hair is nappy, not smooth like mine. You're not very pretty. Maybe if you drink bleach, you'll whiten your skin. You'll never graduate, but you're good enough to go pro. That's how you'll make it in life. Too Black to be American, not Black enough to be African. My name is Linsay Irene Hill. I am the descendant of slaves. The generations before me were broken. The generations before me have carried burdens of pain. I have carried that burden. I feel that pain. So heavy that as I walk through this life, the weight of my ancestors manifests in weight of my body. I was a queen once. Melanin kissed by mother sun and birthed by father moon. As I remember the broken pieces of my ancestors, as I remember the chains that bound me to the deck of my ship, as I remember the woman who was raped by her master in front of her child, more children from the womb of the unwilling, as I remember that I swing from so many trees, swinging left to right, right to left. As I remember the woman who cries out for her history, all she knows is she's coming from slaves. As I remember that by healing myself, I heal generations of pain. As I remember, I am Linsay Irene Hill. I remember I am my ancestors' wildest dreams. I am too Black to be American, not Black enough to be African. I am African. I am American. At this time, I would like to go back and have Vanna tell us some of her story.
Thank you, Linsay. For me, generational trauma was passed down unconsciously because my parents, aunts, and uncles were alphas. So I was bound to be one too. The older I got, the more courageous I became. Reflecting back as their caregivers, I wasn't able to care for them as a conscious daughter or niece. I've learned to ask for forgiveness from them and to forgive myself because I was just winging it, just like how I was in life. I was their caregiver until their hospice time was over. As I got older, I realized I better start training my kids on how I want to be treated when I get older, because every day I'm getting older. My family was like most of the other Southeast Asian families in America. They had at least one child impacted by the criminal justice system. For my mom, she had two, me and my older brother. I only went to jail, but my brother went to prison. We didn't know it then, but we were always racially profiled. And the racist systems knew how to keep brown people down. And thank the Lord that my charges were not deportable, but there are lots and lots of others who have deportation orders and long, hefty sentences. And to this day, we don't have accurate data for Southeast Asians because we are still suppressed. We almost never been given quality legal representation or options in the courts. We never knew we had a voice or support. Now that the people are learning that. So there are lots of regrets and woulda, coulda, shouldas. But now it's a little too late. We have too many criminal charges that we can't erase. Only the few handful of people found courage and the resources, which means money, to fight against their final deportation order or for the resentencing of their hefty sentences. It seems like now the immigration laws are just now being paid attention to. Back then, they never gave us the disclosure that if someone pleads guilty, that they would be at risk for deportation. Now they make sure they disclose that in courts. You can't see the lotus flower, but a lotus flower depicts how I grew up and how I turned out. I was once curious, how can a flower grow in murky water yet turn out so elegant? At the age of 35, I became more conscious, and it seemed like the more pain I went through, the more I tried to find solutions for my problems. It was always in me to start a nonprofit, but because I didn't have the education or degree under my belt, I had to take the back roads to my destination. In 2016, I founded an organization called Tacoma Healing Awareness Community. Our vision is to disrupt the cycle of systemic oppression of Southeast Asians, as well as other ethnic groups in Tacoma and surrounding communities. Our mission is to empower and support youth, families, and individuals in need by providing tools and resources. TAP collaborates with community agencies and leaders to heal, reconcile, and restore justice to marginalized communities who are at risk for systemic oppression. I want to give a shout out to our board members, Melissa Yang, Darani Nam, and Renee Meshi. Also the faithful volunteers who are always sticking by my side and agreeing to execute all the ideas that I always come up with. I am also a board member with Metropolitan Developmental Council and a core coordinating team member with Heal the Core Tacoma, Washington. This is our solution to addressing Asian hate crimes in America. I've learned that the laws in the Constitution was not created for people of color. It was created to keep the white people supreme. Matter of fact, the 1996 IRA signed by President Bill Clinton was a game changer for refugees and immigrants, especially from Southeast Asia. That revved the deportation process up and deported over 3,000 of my people back to our homeland. Do you know what that does to families that are left behind? It creates more traumatic experiences for them. It separates families, breaks more hearts, and more tears are shed. And then what about the kids that are raised in juvie without a father or mother? They go to prisons and basically they're raised in the prison system. You all call it recidivism. What I see a lot now is people talk a lot about equality and equity, only because they're paid to say it. I have proof that gatekeepers are doing their job. They're not only white, they're also people of color, people of privilege, and it's usually the same people holding the keys, the racist people. I've met a few, maybe a handful of folks who would fit in this category. But what I saw during this pandemic was that A lot of us, we didn't have to make a lot of changes or adjustments other than frequent hand washings and wearing masks. We still had to go to work to survive. We still had to go to grocery stores, get food and household supplies. We already knew how to survive the hard times because we were already trying to recover from a current epidemic, an epidemic of systemic oppression on brown folks. We have been suffering from mental health issues. No one ever seems to understand that people don't make the choices that they do because they want to. They don't have a choice. It was usually forced before we got the help that we needed. In my lifetime, I've tried counseling many times because I suffer from PTSD. To find that there was no one who really understood my unique journey until I met a young mental health counselor who was a person of color. She shared with me that I wasn't the problem, and I'm doing everything that I can from a genuine and authentic place. It's the world we live in. It's the current climate. And you will be labeled by the color of your skin and treated unfairly. I'm so thankful that I found some ways to help myself during times of crisis. My people, we've been overlooked. We've been the victims of the criminal justice system and poverty. We've been surviving without the proper legal representation, resources, and proper support so that we could have a slight chance to thrive in this economy. I come from the marginalized community, so I know what I'm talking about. We have been actively creating and organizing awareness events that focuses on healing and surviving in today's social climate. I show up in spaces where my imperfections are being perfected, learning as I go, because I'm not perfect, although I do feel like I'm good enough and I deserve to be where I want to be. While I'm creating my own tables and staying true to myself, I represent the Southeast Asian community with Asian pride. Thank you.
Next slide, please. So we want to have these action items to take with you today. Carry this conversation outside of this space and share our words as a way to talk about trauma. Support community, whatever way that looks like for you. If you see someone bleeding out with their trauma and the result might be creating spaces of chaos, find ways to show that you see them and that they aren't their trauma. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. We really wanted to thank you for taking the time to be with us today and to just be present with us today. Next slide, please. If anything that you want to contact us about, to have a conversation about, please reach us. These are our emails, and we have a few minutes left, about like 2 or 3. So if there's a comment that you would like to put through, or if there's a question you would like to reach out about, please let us know.
Thank you everyone for joining and listening. Hope you found it useful, and may you guys do what's right in your heart.